Hey guys, this is Miguel Concepcion, editor at GameSpot, with Jean-Luc.
Hello.
We are here to talk about Fallout 4 VR. We both had some hands-on time with it. Jean-Luc, what were your general impressions?
Well, I've played a variety of VR games this year, and I've actually played all the Bethesda VR games, and there were a lot of things about this that I found appealing, but also pretty mixed and too negative.
It seems to be a trend in a lot of these ports of games that originated on consoles and PC, non-VR. I had a similar experience too. It was no surprise, fiddling around in the house that you start in, getting used to the direct movement and trying out the teleportation and even just getting to the crib. That was a challenge in itself. But
in classic Fallout style, I started with my head in the mirror, like in the wall.
Wow.
Like when you're supposed to do the character creator, like my head was just stuck in there.
War never changes.
You're gonna knock him dead at the Veterans Hall tonight, hun.
You think?
So all right, it's a Bethesda game. It's janky. Let's go.
Not to make excuses for the jankiness, but yes, we were talking about the UI, and Fallout 4 didn't get any much recognition or accolades for its user interface. So it was already kind of at a disadvantage going into VR, but I mean, we tried to make the most of it.
Yeah, it feels clumsy in VR in a way that VR is supposed to be very intuitive. And I think part of that was the, they make some good efforts. So, for example, the Pip-Boy is directly on your arm. And, in the kind of the way you'd imagine it, you actually take your left arm and you pull it up to your hand, or your face, and you can see, the Pip-Boy, it'll actually, expand and, blows up, and you can, read the screen. I thought the expanding thing was kind of weird. That sort of took me out of it. You can adjust that, which is cool. But the problem is that, okay, now I have it up to my face. Instinctively, you'd be like, oh, I can mess with the dials, with your other hand, but that's not a thing you can do. So you have to use the scroll wheel on the Vive controller, and that just, I'm sitting there holding it like this, kind of scrolling it. It just feels really awkward.
It seems to be a nice compromise over actually expecting Bethesda from creating a Pip-Boy device that's integrated with the VR. I mean, that's a pipe dream.
That's the dream. That's the dream right there.
Right.
It's my collector's edition suddenly works in the VR fully.
Right.
That would be so cool.
I mean, I was thinking about the first moment where the VR sort of sold me as sort of a strength in experiencing Fallout 4, and for me, it was actually going down the elevator for the first time in Vault 111, actually going down as the nuclear explosion happened, and the natural impulse to look up as you're going down the elevator. I'm like, this is cool. Obviously, you can do that in the traditional game, but in the VR, it just takes it to another level.
For me, it was when I was walking around the world, just kind of being able to experience the world and kind of appreciate the look and the scale of everything. Is really cool. There are some weirdnesses I had. So I played Resident Evil 7 in VR, and that game was, I don't know when they started building it for VR, but that game came out with VR, so they obviously had put a lot of thought into VR when they were designing that game. And the game's art aesthetic feels like a real place, and everything proportionally feels correct. You feel I am in this house. In Fallout, everything feels slightly off. Characters feel slightly smaller than they should, than in real life. Door handles feel slightly lower. At first I thought actually I was sinking into the floor, the calibration wasn't correct, but it actually was right, and my character model is just really tiny. So it's this weird thing where you don't think about it when you're playing a game normally on a TV, and I imagine the developers, they built the game for traditional, gameplay experiences, so they can kind of make them look a little more cartoonish in proportions. But when you translate that into VR, where it's supposed to be this, seamless experience, suddenly it has, this weird uncanny valley effect where you're this doesn't feel quite right.
Right. And, going off on that point, it was sort of comforting that when you fight your first enemies, which were the cockroaches, you didn't necessarily have to bend down, despite the fact you were always punching down.
Yeah.
And you also make an interesting point comparing it to Resident Evil 7. This is a game that was presumably built without VR in mind.
Right.
And now I'm thinking about what games are in development now that we know about that we're probably going to play on our consoles and PCs, but might have like a VR team,
from the ground up, yeah.
Right, in like Resident Evil kind of way.
That's kind of what I feel like a lot of these Bethesda games are right now, is that they are sort of implementing older franchises with VR to test the waters of building VR. And I can see the end game being, well, the next Fallout or the next Elder Scrolls will have VR built in from the ground up.
Right.
As opposed to we're just sort of tacking it on, and then you get all these problems like, well, the UI doesn't really feels clumsy in VR, and the proportions kind of feel off, and the aiming feels weird. Like the shooting in this game feels inaccurate, and it's kind of that way in Fallout by design, but in VR it feels especially infuriating. Like trying to aim with a gun, I had such a hard time, and they give you the VAT system, which kind of like slows everything down, and you can like kind of see where like if you're aiming at a guy's head, and so that helps. But compared to like other games that like more naturally fit like shooting a gun in VR like super hot, like I felt like I was aiming at a dude, and then like I just wasn't hitting him.
But earlier you were talking about. It speaks to maybe like the kind of immersion that playing Fallout 4 in VR did for you. But you were talking about how you were resting the rifle on your arm, despite the fact that you really weren't doing that in the game, but you were stabilizing it for your own immersion.
Totally, yeah. So like you have the pistol, like pistols and basic melee weapons feel pretty good with the Vive,
right.
Like controllers. Like it makes sense. It has like the same weight to it. The second you're holding like a rifle, it feels weird. Like you're like, oh, like this should have more of a weight to it in my hand. And that was something I really liked about Doom VR on the PlayStation, is if you have that big like two-handed aim controller, it actually feels really good holding guns with that. Like it feels like correct weight to it. But it's kind of weird because you'd think like, okay, I'm holding this rifle one-handed. I would want to like shoot it with the hip, but that doesn't make sense. I'm not gonna be able to shoot anything with it. So the other thing is, okay, well, if I like move it really close, you kind of like clip into the model, and then you can like see the crosshair. You're kind of making your own version of like a aim down sights. But then that even still feels weird. So kind of the weird compromise I made was like, well, in fiction, if I was holding a rifle one-handed, you would rest it on your arm and kind of shoot like that. So I was trying to like come up with my own like in fiction reason for why my character would be holding a rifle one-handed, which was probably not their intent, but it kind of, I think that just speaks to the overall feelings of VR, is that as a player, you want to be immersed, and you want to like come up with like logical reasons for why this would behave that way, and like why I would be doing it, and trying the best to make it as immersive as possible. But I feel like the game, just by virtue of being a port of a game that wasn't meant for VR, keeps kind of pulling you out.
Right, which is a nice segue into the movement of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like many first-person games in VR, it has direct movement, or you have the choice of teleporting.
When you play Resident Evil or you play Doom, you can use the stick to move with the direct movement, and that feels fine because it's a stick, right? It's a traditional like joystick. With the Vive, you're using that slide pad, and that just it feels clumsy. It feels clumsy to try and move with the direct movement. So I ended up actually using the teleport, and in those other games I actually prefer the direct movement. I have like an iron stomach when it comes to VR, so I can handle that.
And I don't.
So yeah, for people like you, your only option is to use the teleport. But in this one, I ended up preferring the teleport. And it actually did work better in this game than Skyrim, where in Skyrim, anytime you're in a small environment and you're trying to very precisely be like, I want to get to that table and pick up an apple, both with the direct movement and the teleport, it felt kind of clumsy. You're like kind of like brute forcing your way to this spot. With the Vive, the advantage is that you can kind of teleport close, and then you can actually just like physically walk over in that space and pick something up. Right. So Fallout definitely has the advantage on that front, which is nice.
And I think if you did spend a lot of time on it, you will be able to like find this sort of these control nuances, and it will obviously like demand a lot of stamina for a game that is gonna take you at least like 50, 70 hours to beat.
Right.
Thinking about like my final thoughts, another thing that really sold me on it when we're talking about exploration and just taking in the environment was when I actually got out of the vault. just being able to like take in the blue sky and like looking around was a really great feeling. And reuniting with our robot butler, Cogsworth was his name.
Yeah.
Talking to him, and actually while I'm listening to him, I'm actually like bending down and actually sort of like appreciating all his little details, things that obviously you can do again with a traditional controller and a console, but it was just fascinating just to like bend down and just sort of appreciate his details. And it made me think about like the best context in which to play Fallout 4 in VR, and that is, I think I would best enjoy this after finishing all the story content. And that makes it disappointing that you can't use your old Fallout 4 PC saves to just jump straight into a world that you've already like mostly unlocked and just explore that way. You actually have to start from the beginning of the game.
Yeah, I think your best bet is to find someone who's done all that work for you on the PC and has like uploaded that file to like a mega upload, and you just like download that for you, and then you just put it in the game and play that.
Is that possible?
Probably.
They can't get away with that shit.
Don't come any closer, friend. This doesn't concern you.
Please, help! They're going to kill me!
Shut up,
You're not killing anyone.
says you.
So now you've played all 3 Bethesda VR games that came out. What's your informal ranking?
Informal ranking. So they all have, I'd say, their benefits and their problems. I think the advantage of both Skyrim and Fallout is that there is nothing else like them in VR in terms of just like scope of a world. Like there is no other VR game where you can wander around this massive environment and play, hundreds of hours of content. So there is something to be said about those, as opposed to Doom, which is a much more like tighter, like 3-4 hour experience. But I would say that Doom is probably like the better playing game, like mechanically. Like I had more fun playing it in VR, although even in that case, there were times where it felt like the VR kind of got in the way. And then I was like, man, this would probably be better with a controller. So it's hard for me to recommend any of them outright. I feel like if you are someone who's like a VR aficionado in the sense that you want like a truly immersive experience, I don't think any of these are really like providing that fully. But if you're somebody who like really likes Fallout and happens to have like a VR headset, like you said, it's really cool. Like you get to experience this world in like a new way, and you get to like appreciate like these intricate details about it that you wouldn't get to normally.
Well, there you have it. If you'd like to learn more about these Bethesda VR games, we have a whole bunch of videos and write-ups. Thanks for watching.